And without objection, the chair is authorized to declare a recess at any time. Before I deliver my opening remarks, I wanted to note that today the committee is meeting virtually, and I want to announce a couple of reminders to the members about the conduct of this. First, please keep their video feed on as long as you are present in the hearing. You are responsible for your own microphones. Please keep your microphones muted unless you are speaking. And finally, if members have documents they wish to submit for the record, please email them to the committee clerk, whose email address was circulated prior to the hearing. So good morning and welcome to today's hearing, Enabling Mission Success from the Ground Up, Addressing NASA's Infrastructure Needs. I want to thank our NASA witness for being with us today. This last March, many of us watched in awe as fire and smoke poured from the B-2 test stand at NASA's Stennis Space Center in Mississippi. The fire and smoke was expected and part of NASA's hot fire test of the engines and core stage of the world's most powerful rocket, the Space Launch System, SLS. It was a long-awaited milestone that was many years in the making, and the test was essential to retiring risk and ensuring the performance of the core stage in preparation for upcoming SLS flights. But getting to that critical test meant that NASA not only had to develop the SLS core stage, a challenging effort in its own right, it had to restore the B-2 test stand to its design condition, build out the stand for the larger SLS stage, and complete the special test equipment interfaces. And that reconstruction effort took 6 years. The B-2 story is a stark reminder of what it takes for NASA to achieve its ambitious goals of discovery, exploration, and innovation in space and aeronautics. Whether it's landing Perseverance on Mars, or launching rockets, or testing experimental aircraft systems, or archiving massive amounts of Earth science data, achieving NASA's ambitious and inspiring missions require highly specialized facilities and dedicated physical infrastructure. For NASA, amazingly, that infrastructure comprises over 5,000 buildings and facilities, including those at its 9 field centers, the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, and 5 major facilities, all located across 14 states. However, like the B-2 test stand that was first used to test the Saturn V rocket of the Apollo era, more than 70% of NASA's facilities are 50 years old. Maintaining an increasingly aging infrastructure across such a vast physical footprint has been an ongoing challenge, and NASA's $2.6 billion deferred maintenance backlog is the case in point. Roads and bridges like the Wallops Causeway Bridge is reaching the end of its anticipated service life. Some would tell me that was a long time ago, actually. The aging roof at the Michoud Assembly Facility in Louisiana, HVAC and water systems, and so much more need attention. And on top of these and other urgent infrastructure needs, NASA must also manage the impacts of climate change. The buildings battered by hurricanes, flooding, tornadoes, and the low-lying coastal facilities vulnerable to sea level rise. In short, NASA's foundational infrastructure is cracking, and I fear we're reaching a tipping point. That's why it's essential that we prioritize investments in NASA infrastructure, especially at a time when Democrats and Republicans across the country are coming together on a commitment to new infrastructure. In NASA, we have repair, recapitalization, modernization, sustainability, and some reading also even demolition, and that we do it now. Not doing so risks our future for NASA, a future that creates jobs, generated a 2019 economic impact of $64 billion, and enables some of our most precious assets, people, innovation, and inspiration. A 2010 National Academy's report on NASA's research facilities stated, quote, "The institutional capabilities of the NASA centers, including their laboratories, have always been critical to the successful execution of NASA's flight projects. These capabilities have taken years to develop and depend very strongly on highly competent and experienced personnel and the infrastructure that supports their research." The report underscored that NASA's research labs need to be on par with top-tier universities, corporate laboratories, and other government labs in order to sustain NASA's leadership in science and aeronautics and attract the best talent. It's clear that solving the mysteries of dark energy, finding evidence of microbial life beyond Earth, and advancing core competencies in hypersonics research will take not only the best minds, but world-class facilities. So in closing, when we talk about NASA's infrastructure needs of today, what we're really talking about is NASA's innovation potential of tomorrow. That innovation has profound implications for our economic growth, our workforce, and our international standing. As we know from examples like the cell phone cameras we use constantly, NASA's innovation holds the potential promise of breakthroughs that can literally change our lives for the better every day. I look forward to working with my colleagues on the committee and in Congress to addressing NASA's urgent infrastructure needs and doing so now. So now let me recognize my friend, Dr. Babin from Houston, Texas, for an opening statement. Brian?
Yes, sir. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. The purpose of today's hearing is to address NASA's complex infrastructure issues. NASA is one of the largest property holders in the federal government. They manage 9 field centers and 6 other facilities in 14 different states. This includes $40 billion in assets with an inventory of more than 5,000 buildings and structures. As our NASA witness will testify, many of NASA's buildings and labs are relics of the Apollo, Gemini, and Mercury era, and some even predate NASA to the National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics era. Indeed, 83% of NASA's facilities are beyond their design life. It costs up to 3 times more to repair or to replace equipment after it has failed, rather than if the maintenance had occurred as scheduled. In 2013, the last time this committee examined NASA's infrastructure, the deferred maintenance backlog was estimated to cost $2.1 billion. Well, now it is going to cost us $2.66 billion. I proudly represent the Johnson Space Center, home to NASA's historic Mission Control Center in Houston, and many other unique national capabilities, like the Sonny Carter Neutral Buoyancy Laboratory that trains astronauts for spacewalks, the Experimental Impact Laboratory that studies the effects of high velocity impacts into geologic materials, Ellington Field that houses many of NASA's critical aircraft, and Astro Materials Acquisition and Curation Office that studies materials returned from space, and the White Sands Test Facility that tests materials and propulsion systems. Because I represent one of the largest NASA centers, I'm certainly aware of the challenges that NASA faces when it comes to infrastructure. There is no greater advocate for NASA facilities, which are critical national assets. Unfortunately, long-term infrastructure and maintenance investments take a backseat to near-term program and mission requirements. But failure to adequately maintain and manage infrastructure could actually compromise NASA's ability to carry out its vast array of missions. And that's why NASA Office of the Inspector General highlighted infrastructure in its 2020 report on top management and performance challenges. And rather than being an afterthought, NASA must proactively assess and manage its infrastructure and budgets to reflect its missions and its responsibilities. To its credit, NASA has attempted to do this through various initiatives over the years. NASA developed an agency facility strategy, an agency master plan, center master plans, elevated mission support to the directorate level, developed a mission dependency index and a facilities condition index, conducted a technical capabilities assessment, as well as a business services assessment, and is moving towards a new NASA operating model and mission support architecture program. That's a lot of management jargon, but hopefully it will lead to efficient decision-making and research allocation. Put simply, NASA should do what every family in this country does, that is to manage its budget. When a family considers new spending, they factor in the rent, the mortgage, and upkeep. NASA's FY22 budget request calls for an overall increase of 6.3%. NASA's FY22 budget request for safety, security, and mission services, which funds center maintenance and operations, is roughly $3 billion, a 3.8% increase over FY21 enacted levels. The FY22 request for construction, environmental compliance, and remediation is actually a 9% reduction from FY21 enacted levels. If NASA's facilities and infrastructure are in need, they should be appropriately prioritized in the agency's budget request. Administrator Nelson indicated earlier this year that NASA has a list of infrastructure requirements totaling over $5 billion, but the administration has not formally requested additional funding to my knowledge. And that means additional infrastructure funding hasn't been cleared by the Office of Management and Budget, nor has it been considered in the larger context of the federal budget, including offsets, deficits, or additional revenue requirements. I think that we can all agree that NASA's infrastructure is critical to its overall mission success, but it needs to be incorporated and prioritized in the formal budget process, not as an off-budget wish list. Creating a budget is what every family in this country does, and I'm confident that NASA, the administration, and Congress can and must do the same. And so with that, Mr. Chairman, thank you so very much, and I will yield back.
Ranking Member Babin, thank you very much for your comments. I greatly appreciate them. And now let me recognize the chairman of the full committee, Chairwoman Johnson from Texas.
Well, thank you very much. And I want to thank you, Chairman Beyer, for holding this hearing today on a very timely topic of NASA's urgent infrastructure needs. The subcommittee held a hearing back in 2013 on NASA's aging infrastructure. We heard then about the risk to NASA's ability to successfully and safely achieve its ambitious missions with infrastructure that was largely dated back to the Apollo era and was more than 40 years old. On this date, in 1958, NASA was established. We knew then, as we know now, that infrastructure has to be kept up to date. More than 50 years old, many of the concerns from 2013 still ring true today. For example, what was $2.2 billion deferred maintenance back in 2013 has grown to be more than $2.6 billion. So NASA is falling behind, not catching up. NASA's infrastructure needs span the spectrum. They include the mundane, but the critical and often forgotten utility and access systems across 9 centers and other research and test facilities. They also include the specialized and unique R&D facilities that no other entity has, including wind tunnels for subsonic and hypersonic aircraft, gigantic clean rooms and vacuum chambers for highly sensitive interplanetary spacecraft. One of the most powerful supercomputers on the planet, neutral buoyancy tools, and countless others. Managing this vast infrastructure is made more challenging by climate change, with some of NASA's critical facilities located in coastal, low-lying regions vulnerable to sea level rise and the increasing frequency and severity of extreme weather. In my home state of Texas, Houston's Johnson Space Center saw significant flooding in 2017 from Hurricane Harvey. It's clear that NASA's infrastructure challenges need attention now if NASA is to continue to lead and succeed in achieving its inspiring and ambitious missions. That's why I'm working hard to have Congress address NASA infrastructure as part of a larger investment in the federal R&D infrastructure. While the path forward in Congress may not yet be totally clear, my commitment to addressing our R&D infrastructure needs is steadfast. Science, research, and innovation are our future. Without necessary core capabilities, such as facilities and infrastructure, we run the risk of constraining that future. That's not the vision I want for NASA. As I close, I want to thank our witness, Mr. Robert Gibbs, for appearing before us today, and I look forward to his testimony. Thank you, and I yield back.
Madam Chair, thank you very much for your opening statement. At this time, I'd like to introduce our witness, Mr. Robert Gibbs is the Associate Administrator for the Mission Support Directorate at NASA headquarters in Washington, which provides institutional support to enable successful accomplishment of NASA mission objectives. Mr. Gibbs first joined NASA as the Assistant Administrator for the Office of Human Capital Management and NASA's Chief Human Capital Officer in May 2017. From 2013 to 2017, he served as the Chief Human Capital Officer at the Department of Energy. And prior to becoming a member of the Senior Executive Service, Mr. Gibbs completed the nuclear training pipeline and served at sea with the U.S. Navy, completing numerous strategic deterrent patrols and ashore at nuclear repair facilities. He's a retired naval officer. He holds a Bachelor of Arts in Business Management from the University of Washington, and he's a Doctor of Jurisprudence from Northern Virginia's George Mason University. So welcome, Mr. Gibbs. As you know, you have 5 minutes for your spoken testimony, and your written testimony, however long it is, will be included in the record for hearing. And when you've completed your spoken testimony, we'll begin with the questions. And each member will have 5 minutes to question our one-person panel. So, Mr. Gibbs, you're center stage, and you are now recognized.
Thank you, Chairman Beyer, Ranking Member Babin, members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to appear today to discuss NASA's infrastructure. We look forward to working with you to change the trajectory of NASA's infrastructure health, ensure the agency's continued prominence as a national illustration of leadership in space, exploration, technical, and aeronautic innovation. I'd like to begin by offering a backdrop for this conversation to contextualize the challenge NASA faces. When NASA was founded in 1958, public investment in national vision to lead the world in space exploration and scientific discovery. Apollo-era infrastructure provided a modern foundation from which we launched into space. The first humans, Americans, stepped onto the surface of the moon. Over the last 60 years, NASA has continued to inspire the world to explore the universe, to learn to live and work in space, advance science, and develop technologies that have improved life for everyone. Today, America has a rapidly expanding space industry, including increased commercial and international participation. NASA's role remains crucial to enabling commercial growth, investing in science and engineering for responsible space activity for the global community of spacefaring nations. Our current missions are no less inspirational: to return humans to the moon, establish a permanent lunar presence, and extend humanity to Mars, expand our understanding of climate science and the human impacts on, to make engineering breakthroughs and drive economic expansion. However, a majority of our facilities are assets of the Apollo era. They're now in a state of marked obsolescence and degradation. This leads us to one inescapable point.
Mr. Gibbs, your sound keeps coming in and out. It's almost cycling. If some of the NASA technical folks can help us.
Working on it immediately. Is this any better? Maybe I just need to lean forward a bit.
Let's see. Just keep talking for a second.
How about this? I'll try 2 mics. Is 2 mics better?
Sir,
Yes,
it's as if
please.
there's an automatic, it's as if there's an automatic gain control and then it's taking the volume up and down. So they may want to check that.
I'm looking at our tech guys and we'll hopefully get this straightened out. If you can hear me, I'll continue.
Yes, please, continue.
As I was saying, this leads us to one inescapable point. NASA's infrastructure represents the single greatest threat to mission success. Approximately 82% of our facilities are beyond their designed life. Our annual maintenance requirements are increasing every year and exceeding our resources. Maintenance of 5,000 plus buildings and structures has been consistently underfunded due to competing priorities, resulting in the deferred maintenance of $2.6 billion referenced earlier. Historical and recent NASA budget requests constitute the absolutely essential requirements that ensure mission success. But NASA continues to carry significant threat of infrastructure failure. NASA has had a substantial number of critical infrastructure requirements for repair, modernization, recapitalization, new capability across the centers. These requirements represent executable infrastructure actions that NASA has assessed would go far to offset these mounting risks and possible delays to schedule. Hardware, continuing operations, and personal safety. If you could please display slide 1. I want to provide some examples of the Artemis era investments we need to maintain our technical capabilities that enable these groundbreaking achievements. A hypersonic wind tunnel at Langley Research Center would enable future investments in high-speed travel and more efficient air travel. A new robotics lab at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory in California would propel NASA forward in the uncrewed exploration of Mars and other planets. We recently opened a health and human performance lab at Johnson Space Center in Texas, which provides NASA the collaborative research environment to understand impacts and the potential of space travel. If you please show slide 2. Horizontal infrastructure is just as vital to NASA's operation as the specialized crane at Kennedy that assembles the Space Launch System. When a water main ruptures, like the one did at Johnson Space Center in 2020, mission activity halts, timelines are delays, and repairs are costly. Other examples include the degradation of the Walb's Flight Facility Causeway Bridge in Virginia, which is the only access to the launch complex that supplies the International Space Station, and necessary site-wide infrastructure improvements that enable increased launch tempo required by NASA, DoD, and commercial partners at the spaceport at Kennedy Space Center. You show slide 3. In closing, a greater investment is needed to modernize and build the capabilities of the future, something our commercial and international partners, our employees, and our stakeholders demand. Investing in NASA capability leads directly to scientific innovation, more efficient, more effective space travel, the development of the next generation of scientists, engineers, and astronauts. Funding NASA's infrastructure will accelerate 21st century advancements in climate science, avionics, propulsion, green technology, miniaturizations, and so much more. Given NASA's role as a proven role as an economic driver, innovation catalyst, and jobs creator, an investment in NASA's infrastructure and next generation capabilities is an investment in American jobs and expanding the commercial markets. Thank you, Chairman Beyer, Ranking Member Babin, and the members of the committee and the subcommittee for giving me this time. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Mr. Gibbs, thank you very much. It's fascinating to look at your map and realize that more than $5 billion in NASA investments in Virginia that I represent, in Alabama with Mr. Brooks, in Florida with Mr. Posey, over $4 billion in Colorado with Mr. Pearlbutter, and over $16 billion in California, where New Jersey is left out. Let me begin. Mr. Gibbs, Mr. Babin talked about how families plan their budget and how we shouldn't be doing emergency off the books funding for something like this. I noticed that at your 2.6 billion number, that's roughly 7% of the 39 billion in asset value of NASA. Are we in a different period now? Why is there a crisis at this time, looking back at budgets over the last 5, 10, 15, 20 years? Has NASA structurally failed to ask for the right amount of money to keep up this infrastructure on an ongoing basis?
So I think yes, sir, I do see where you're going with this, and I think it's a very fair question. For 10 of the last 12 years, our budget that we have received has been less than what we've asked for. With an aging infrastructure, as we have at NASA, this becomes a sort of a circular problem, right? You can't invest to maintain your aging infrastructure. It gets older, you need more money to invest, you have less dollars, and it goes around like that. I do think that we are at a critical point right now with infrastructure. I'm concerned. It's what keeps me up at night. My portfolio has a lot more than infrastructure in it, and I will tell you, I am concerned.
Great, thank you. When we had Senator Administrator Nelson here in May, he suggested a number like 5.4 billion in infrastructure needs. What's the gap, the doubling between the 2.6 that we typically use for NASA and Senator Nelson's 5.4?
So deferred maintenance in the $5.4 billion investment portfolio are slightly different things. If we were to receive those additional funds, it would retire a majority or a substantial majority of the deferred maintenance. But the 5.4 is looking at across the entire complex of NASA, driven by the mission. You know, what are the things that we need to invest in to make our mission successful, not only today, but going forward? What is the facility, the infrastructure, all of the investments we need to make? It falls into categories like modernization. Where do we need to build new capability? We talked a little bit about the hypersonics tunnel. I think that is a new capability that should be a national capability and worked with the Department of Defense. We talked about recapitalization, modernization, and repair. So it's bringing all of these facilities back up to acceptable standards. I think that's the way I would address that, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Yeah, Mr. Gibbs, the 2010 National Research Council report I mentioned raised significant concerns about the research laboratories. Are we yet at the point where the infrastructure is an impediment to scientific progress and discovery?
I think we're able to continue with scientific discovery, but that point where infrastructure is going to start limiting mission is around the corner. I think it's in the very near future for us. That's how I'd answer that, sir.
Yeah, okay. One small point, you in your written testimony, you talked about mitigating systemic arc flash issues in electrical systems. Are these, is this a new problem, or is this the arc flash is something we've been dealing with for a long time?
It's a problem that has existed for a period of time. And when you're talking about arc flash, you're talking about electrical explosions when you have a low impedance to ground on energized equipment. It has gotten worse as our electrical infrastructure has aged. You know, now it requires, you can't work on energized gear. You have to de-energize systems, sometimes laboratories or structures or parts of our centers in order to work on this gear. So it is a personnel safety issue. It has an unpredictable failure rate or failure mode. So we have to be, you know, putting personnel safety first. It requires us to take additional steps, and those steps are required more often right now.
I seem to recall 6.5 years ago, we had an arc flash in the metro tunnel here in Washington, D.C. that killed someone. One last question. I was fascinated that there are 134 cleanup projects, surface or groundwater installations, hazardous waste. How are we doing in our responsibility to those 134 communities?
You know, we put public safety and protecting the environment as one of our greatest priorities. The budget that we have in 23-22 is enough to maintain our fiscal responsibilities, our statutory responsibilities in these facilities. You know, we talked a little bit about the Wallops Bridge. There has been an issue, Wallops Chicotee, in the water supply. And I think we've done a very good job of installing water filtration equipment, providing the town with clean drinking water, monthly sampling, which is showing no results of any contaminant, and doing all of these things and digging new wells as a way to sort of ensure that we hold up our end of the environmental questions that face the agency.
Mr. Gibbs, thank you very much. Let me now recognize the ranking member, Mr. Babin, for his questions.
There it is. Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Gibbs, thank you for being here. We appreciate you. And my question, as I mentioned in my opening statement, there at JSC in Houston, it's home to the Astromaterials Acquisition and Curation Office. As NASA plans to develop the Mars sample return mission, there's an ongoing debate over where the return samples will be processed and housed. At a hearing earlier this year, NASA scientists indicated that they had not decided as of yet on that location. From an infrastructure perspective, does it make sense to build a new capability somewhere else rather than utilizing existing facilities, particularly when NASA already has an infrastructure backlog?
So to answer your question directly, JSC, Johnson Space Center, is the center that owns the Mars sample curation, right? The sample return program. I don't think we have come through where that facility is going to be located yet.
Okay, well, is NASA planning to use the existing infrastructure at JSC to support this mission, or what are some of the thoughts there among those who are making this decision?
Sir, I'd have to take that for the record and talk with my science colleagues. I do know at this point we haven't made a decision as an agency.
Okay. Well, NASA released a request for proposals for spacesuits this week. The Johnson Space Center maintains the nation's spacesuit and the extravehicular activity expertise. How much funding does JSC receive for infrastructure from the Human Exploration Mission Directorate to fund spacesuit and EVA facilities?
I apologize that I'll have to take that for the record. I do not control the HEO program budget for spacesuits that is developed, that are developed and maintained at Johnson.
Okay, well, I want to hear your opinion then. If NASA outsources spacesuits and EVA capabilities, will JSC's budget to maintain the facilities be covered through the Safety, Security, and Mission Services account to offset any funding shortfalls caused by the acquisition strategy?
So at this point, I have no intention of lowering the budget at Johnson, if that answers your question.
Okay. Were additional costs to maintain the critical infrastructure necessary to enable EVAs and spacesuit development and training considered in any cost-benefit analysis of acquisition approaches to determine the best value for the taxpayer?
Again, I apologize, but I'd have to take that for the record and talk with our procurement folks. My gut tells me yes. We go through a very in-depth analysis as we work through all procurement opportunities, but I don't know that for a fact.
Okay. How does NASA ensure that such a cost-benefit analysis is an apples-to-apples comparison? I can envision a scenario where a service contract would be cheaper at face value, but when the necessary NASA facility and infrastructure costs are accounted for, the overall taxpayer cost is larger if facilities are not decommissioned.
Yeah, I will tell you, I'll answer that very generically, that I will tell you as we go through these propositions, we spend a lot of time to ensure that we have accuracy in our data. When we're looking at procurement opportunities, we look at total life cycle cost, all in what did it cost us to procure this activity or this service. Additionally, what we have are folks from across the agency with multiple stakeholders sitting in with us as we go through these procurement and other decisions to ensure that all the folks that are impacted by these decisions get that voice heard. And we have a pretty strong group, honestly, that does this work at the agency.
Okay, the NASA IG semi-annual report to Congress recently highlighted the fact that a recommendation from 2013 has still not been implemented by NASA. The recommendation states, ensure life cycle and milestone reviews incorporate programmatic and technical risks and are conducted with the Associate Administrator for Human Exploration and Operations Mission Directorate and other senior agency officials. Why hasn't NASA implemented this recommendation yet?
I'd have to take that for the record, sir.
Okay, well, can you ensure that NASA provides a response to these questions for the record, if you don't mind? We would greatly appreciate that and seeing the answers to these.
Yes, sir. Happy to do so. Thank you for your questions.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Babin, very much. And I recognize the chair of the full committee, if our chairwoman is still here. If she was here, if she is not, then let me recognize Chairwoman Zoe Lofgren, not chair of this committee, but chair of lots of other things. So Ms. Lofgren, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thanks for holding this hearing. Obviously, we have infrastructure needs throughout this agency, and no matter where those infrastructure needs, it matters to all of us because it's the science mission that drives our decision making. But I do want to mention the Ames Research Center. It's not in my district, but it is in the county I represent, and it is the second oldest NASA center. It's my perception that the infrastructure needs has sometimes fallen off the priorities, and a sense that one of the biggest barriers to funding is the lack of strong advocates at the top of the agency. Now, that could be that, other centers are dominated by specific programs, for example, earth science or aeronautics. Ames is a blend of smaller programs across all the divisions. And so that kind of advocacy is diffused. I'm wondering what kind of evaluation we are going to use so that a program like Ames doesn't get lost in the dust, if you will. What kind of objective evaluation is going to be used? And Mr. Gibbs, I thank you so much for your advocacy. You know, it's possible, we hope not, that not every priority will be funded. If there's not 100% funding, how are you going to prioritize what gets funded?
Thank you, ma'am. I appreciate your question. First, on the concept of how do we make all of these things work right across the agency? We have a lot of competing priorities, a lot of competing needs. And in a limited resource environment, it's tough. I'll just tell you, frankly, this is a tough problem to solve. We have an agency master planning process, which we have stood up in the last year, which involves representatives from all of the mission directorates that come in and say, here are our requirements. It involves all of the centers saying, here are our capabilities. And then we take a look at those things and say, okay, across our infrastructure portfolio, how do we put these things in buckets? Fundamentally, what are the things we absolutely know we need today and tomorrow to complete our mission? So that's one bucket we can set aside. What are the things that we know we don't need that should be on our demo list? Let's put that aside. Now let's really focus on those things in the middle that could possibly be out grants using enhanced use lease authority, or things we could just maintain at a very minimal funding level. So that way we can continue to stretch our dollars to the greatest extent possible. I will tell you that I think Ames has pretty good representation within the agency, and its importance to the overall agency mission, I think, goes without question.
Well, I appreciate that. And so many of the scientists there, some live in my district, and I'll tell you, it's tough because, Ames is located in the middle of Silicon Valley. You've got kids walking out of college that are earning 2 or 3 times what those scientists are earning, and they stay there because of their commitment to the mission. And I really respect that, and I appreciate what they are doing, and we need to make sure that their service and sacrifice is honored in every way possible. I'm wondering, Mr. Gibbs, would it be possible to share that document that you've just described so the committee can understand the thinking of the agency as you sort through the very challenging decisions you need to make?
Yeah, we're very happy to work with the committee and get you the information you need.
I would love to see that. Chairman, thank you so much for holding this hearing. I think it's essential. And, as we know, it's already the National, the National Research Council has already deemed NASA's infrastructure needs to be, trailing NSF and other facilities, DOE, university facilities. We really can't permit that to continue. And I appreciate your leadership and that of the chair and the ranking member to make sure that that changes. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you very much, Ms. Lofgren. I now recognize the chairman from Cape Canaveral, or the member from Cape Canaveral, Mr. Posey.
Thank you very much, Chairman Byer, for holding this hearing addressing NASA's urgent infrastructure needs. It's great to have you here, Mr. Gibbs, and great to see NASA making great strides that it has made in regards to its operation. I remember when the legislature appropriated a few $1 million for a life sciences lab. It took, I think, something like 3 years for NASA to get it together and come up with a lease offer. And wow, what a paradigm swing we've seen since those days, which I most notably observed through the leadership of Bob Cabana at KSD, and I'm sure Janet Petro would do just as great a job. Between the civil and commercial space launches at Kennedy Space Center, it puts a tremendous strain on its existing infrastructure, as you mentioned. This is sometimes maybe a good thing that we're doing so well, but we should work to address the needs that will meet a higher launch cadence at Kennedy Space Center. This means increasing pipeline capacity and adding wider roads to accommodate the transportation of the next generation vehicles, as you well know. The state of Florida has been forward leaning on addressing the infrastructure challenges with some funding. And after the constellation of the shuttle program, the Kennedy Space Center pivoted to supporting not only space launches, but also the commercial sector array. KSC repurposed critical national capabilities like the vehicle assembly building and the crawler transporter, and made other underutilized facilities like the orbiter processing facilities and launch pads available for commercial users. Question is, as the commercial space sector grows, how can NASA best leverage the unique partnership it has with Space Florida to maintain its infrastructure that is key not only to NASA, but to the state of Florida?
Yeah, thank you, sir, for your question. I think that's a great partnership. You know, the Indian River Bridge, we worked with the state of Florida, Space Florida, the Florida Department of Transportation, and the U.S. Department of Transportation and their infra-grant program to be able to recapitalize the bridge. Right now, NASA is paying to relocate all of the utilities at the Indian River Bridge. Construction will begin later this fall with completion by 2025. So that's a great example of Florida working with NASA to achieve that joint sort of program of expanding the space industry. I will also tell you that we are going to have to make additional infrastructure investments at KSC to support this increased launch tempo. 2021 is going to see the most launches NASA has ever done. And that pace is expected to continue through 24, 25. We have to make commensurate investments in infrastructure to be able to support commercial, DoD, and NASA's launches in the future.
Yeah, I understand that KSC submitted a construction of facility request for fiscal year 2022 of $63.8 million, but only $33.3 million was approved for inclusion in the president's budget request. The request to build a new high bay platform of $22.5 million and the RL-10 engine shell down at $8 million to support the SLS. Block 1B were both rejected, unfortunately. Do you know why the infrastructure projects associated with SLS Block 1B were not supported?
Yes, sir. So that is a human exploration operations program funded line item. That's what they're funding. But I will tell you, again, it's the same symptom of limited resources. You have to measure those resources across the agency in order to meet requirements. Now, I think those were not necessarily declined. I think they were deferred to later progress. But I'd have to check with our HEO program folks to make sure I'm giving you the accurate information.
Okay. Do you know if there's other plans to address the shortfall?
I do not. I do not.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I see my time is about to expire, and I yield back. Thank you again for this hearing.
Thank you, Mr. Posey, very much. And now recognize the past and future governor of Florida, Member Charlie Crist.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Gibbs, thank you for being with us this morning. As you know, NASA's Enhanced Use Lease Authority allows the agency to lease underutilized property to private entities, academic institutions, and state and local governments, while also allowing NASA to keep the proceeds to cover maintenance costs and other activities. It's my understanding that NASA has used this authority with great success at Kennedy Space Center to help transform the facility into a robust multi-user spaceport to include SpaceX, Blue Origin, and others. It's this type of innovation that gave the Space Coast its new nickname of the Comeback Coast, following the shuttle's retirement and resulting layoffs in 2011. However, you note in your testimony that NASA's Enhanced Use Lease Authority expires at the end of the calendar year. What is the impact to NASA if this authorization is allowed to lapse? And what would happen to those leases?
So the impact would be significant. Enhanced Use Lease Authority allows us to charge a fair market value for facilities and infrastructure that is underutilized in the NASA portfolio. Being able to take these proceeds in and apply it to infrastructure, apply it to needs, apply it to other areas of critical sort of needing some dollars, an infusion of dollars to maintain or get it back to adequate levels is incredibly important. Additionally, those partnerships, those relationships that the EULs, Enhanced Use Lease Authorities, actually form are just as important, as we go forward. Now, the impact to the folks that currently have EULs, it's probably fairly minimal, as I would assume that they would be allowed to continue through the period of the agreement. The issue becomes that we have 15 new EULs we're looking to enact in FY22. And I couldn't do any of those. And a lot of those relate to Space Coast activity, not only here, but in the state of Virginia as well. So I think, EULs are going to be critical for our success kind of going forward.
Thank you. Administrator Nelson previously has testified that NASA has identified a set of infrastructure needs totaling about $5.4 billion. It's no secret that Kennedy Space Center is located right on the Atlantic coast of Florida, which makes it vulnerable to climate change. Do any of the infrastructure needs the administrator referenced address the need for climate adaptations at Kennedy?
They do. I will tell you that, working with the impacts of climate and climate change are incredibly important. Kennedy is a great example of something that we're working on to solve. We've built a 17-foot barrier dune between the waterways and the launch pads that we used recycled soil from the Air Force when they were doing dredging operations. The dune is 17 feet tall. It's 200 foot at the base, 100 foot at the height. And then it's, planted with native grass and plants. Those sorts of efforts to ensure that we can continue to conduct our mission are incredibly important. So yes, we do look at, the coastline restoration efforts, not only there, but at Wallops. We look at earthquake hardening at the Jet Propulsion Laboratories in California as part of this program as well. So there is quite a bit.
Okay, thank you, sir. Beyond the $5.4 billion Administrator Nelson referenced, does NASA have a plan of action to protect Kennedy's assets from the impacts of climate change? And if so, what's included in that plan? And what does NASA need from Congress to carry it out?
Well, I appreciate the question. So at this point in time, we plan these things into our infrastructure budgets. It's about an every 3-year cycle for shoreline replenishment and other things that go on to support Kennedy. But that's about as much of an answer as I can give you.
Fine. Well, NASA's fiscal year 2022 budget request notes that due to COVID-19 closures at NASA centers, most ongoing facility construction projects were halted, and that, quote, in the absence of supplementary funds, planned construction projects may be deferred. Can you discuss which construction projects at Kennedy were significantly impacted by COVID closures, and what impacts will that have on NASA missions carried out at Kennedy, including the launching of the Artemis missions?
So I'll take the complete answer for the record, but I'll give you sort of the overall picture. Is there are a lot of requests for equitable adjustments that went on because of COVID, but that isn't telling you the entire story. The whole story really is that we have to delay, defer, and descope projects on a regular basis because our construction funds are lower than requested. The reality is I've had to delay, defer, descope 47 projects over the last 2 budget cycles because I just didn't have the resources.
Thank you very
Hopefully
much.
that answers your question.
Appreciate that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. I believe we'll now move to Mr. Gonzalez. Oh, no. Get this right. No, Ms. Member Kim from California, you are now recognized. Madam Young Kim, it is your turn to proceed.
I don't think she heard you. There you go.
Okay. Congresswoman Kim, if you can hear us, it is now your turn to ask questions of Mr. Gibbs. And if you're having any technical problems, we can move on to Mr. Gonzalez and come back to you. That would be okay.
Just sent the signal.
Yeah, there we go.
Ms. Kim to unmute.
Mrs. Kim, I think we had you there for a minute. You seem unmuted at the moment. Please proceed.
Am I up?
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry about that. All right. Well, I want to thank you, Chairman Meyer, for yielding, and I want to thank you, Mr. Gibbs, for testifying before the subcommittee today. NASA currently has a maintenance backlog of over $2.66 billion. So how is it that funding broken down by NASA's condition-based maintenance approach and its prioritized risk assessment process? And do all these projects fall under the same priority, or are some more necessary than others? Can you provide the committee with a prioritized list of the $2.66 billion maintenance backlog?
Yes, we can provide you with that list. Understand it's not a static sort of thing. If there's additional resources that we're applying, needs change and the rest of it, but we'd be happy to provide information to show you how we establish our priorities and what those priorities are, if that helps.
Sure. Understanding that maintenance is a priority, why was this not included in the president's fiscal year 22 budget request?
Again, it's one of those things where if you have limited resources, you have to apply those resources to first support the mission, ensure safety, ensure health, and all of those things. And then you have to do the best you can with the resources you have. Unfortunately, maintenance generally is one of the things that gets deferred on a regular basis if you're funded less than what you would have requested. And this isn't something that happened overnight, right? I mean, we talked in 2013 of a $2.2 billion deferred backlog, and it occurred and it happened long before that. Part of this, and this may not be the best answer, but I think it's really part of our reality, is that maintenance and construction and these things, it's not the glamorous stuff that you see. It's not rocket launches and launch pads and landing on Mars and doing all of the really cool, really important science that we do in aeronautics and all the rest of it. Some of this is, you can't see it. It's the infrastructure behind the scenes that, you don't invest in if you have a new lab, but, you have to remember that these labs and launch pads are supported by this horizontal infrastructure, most of which is pre-World War II or in that era. So it becomes a very difficult problem. I hope I answered your question.
Mr. Gibbs, so how is the deferred maintenance backlog affecting our ability to meet timeline goals for the Space Launch System and Orion programs?
Well, right now it's not. It's not impacting our ability to achieve those goals. But I will tell you, as you don't do maintenance, infrastructure, systems, equipment decays. You have an issue with it becoming obsolete. So you have to do certain maintenance. And if you don't do that maintenance, the bill you pay at the other end, I think you heard earlier, someone was saying 3 times, that is a good, strong industry number. It's about 3 times if it fails with an unplanned issue, as opposed to doing that deferred maintenance. But again, it's the environment that we have to operate in and have been operating in for a long period of time.
Sure. Let me ask you one last question. How can NASA better engage with the private sector and other agencies to better utilize on a reimbursable basis and NASA test stands and wind tunnels and other unique facilities?
I think using the Space Act agreements and the Enhanced Use Lease Authority, which we discussed earlier, are 2 great vehicles. But I will tell you, working with others, industry, academia, other federal agencies, which we do on a regular basis today, is absolutely crucial to our success going forward. It has to be part of our program.
Well, with that, thank you so much. I will yield back my time.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Ms. Gibb, very much. We now introduce the Congressman from the great state of Colorado, Mr. Perlmutter.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. And you can see my bumper sticker in the background there, Mr. Gibbs. You know where I'm coming from. I want to get us to Mars by 2033. And so I guess I hear you, and I apologize as a member of Congress that to do the plumbing and to do the road work and do the basic things for any, facility, you guys are kind of put to the back of the bus. And personally, I want to be an advocate for you as we go through this infrastructure package and the reconciliation. And so I would like that list of deferred maintenance projects that you have. I know Ambassador Beyer, I wish Charlie Christ, and I think Brian Babin still is on here, and Don Norcross, all of us to be advocates for you as we go through this infrastructure moment, because you're definitely infrastructure, in my opinion. And I don't want to be a Pollyanna about it, you know, because you've had to deal with these shortfalls, you know, year in, year out. But I'd like to, at this moment, given what we're trying to do, to plus you up a lot. So give me an idea. One, Ms. Kim asked for that list. I'd like that list of needs. Second, my question would be sort of the Artemis program, the moon, Mars. What are your top 2 or 3 infrastructure needs for you to be able to support the Artemis program?
That's a great question. Let's talk a little bit about that $5.4 billion infrastructure list we keep talking about or around. What I will tell you is it'll put jobs in almost every state, and I will execute that $5.4 billion investment in 5 years. We have a lot of stuff already in the box, ready to go to start investing in this infrastructure. We've spent a lot of time on this. We started with a much larger list and then cut it down and say, okay, what are our real needs to support those things? What are the opportunities that we can exploit going forward? What are the things that we can do so our house is in order, so we ever get this opportunity, you know, we would be ready for it. So I think that's one incredibly important thing. I will tell you, and I'll be happy to provide the list, the Artemis related is about $608 million in that bucket, ready to go to support Artemis going forward. I don't have all of the projects and programs specifically laid out of all 5.4 billion, but I'll be happy to take that for the record and provide you that information.
I'd like it. So I have, so I represent the Federal Center in Colorado. I have the National Renewable Energy Lab. We have, you know, sort of the Lockheed Waterton plant south. So there's a big NASA presence or a number of NASA projects. On the Federal Center, I have a laboratory. It's a USGS laboratory, so not something you have to worry about, but of the same vintage of many of your facilities. And literally the roof is ready to fall in. It was a World War II era laboratory, a couple hundred scientists and engineers, and we've got to get a new facility for it. Because over the years, it just has outgrown itself, it's aged. And when I'm looking at some of the statistics here, 83% of your infrastructure is beyond design life. More than 70% is at least 50 years old. And approximately half of your facilities were built at or before the Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo programs. Is that true?
Yes, it is true. And honestly, Congressman, having come from the Department of Energy, I'm very familiar with NREL. I'm very familiar with WAPA out just outside of Denver as well, the Western Area Power Administration, and the investments. I will tell you the infrastructure of NASA is significantly degraded when you compare it to that of the DOE. I can tell you that from having been in both agencies and seen those things. So yes, that is true. We have some unbelievably difficult challenges to face. We have facilities in California that don't have heat and air conditioning. Our advanced material and structure lab at Langley went without air conditioning for a period this summer while they're doing critical work. You know, this just goes on and on across. Now, we do have an opportunity at this moment. If there is investment, we can work on the other side of it and replace these facilities with state-of-the-art facilities that'll support not only NASA, but the nation's interests going forward. So hopefully, we're going to have an opportunity to do those things.
Well, will be an advocate for you. And I think the other members of our committee, Democrats and Republicans, will advocate. And I'm saying to my colleagues, this is the moment for us to advocate for something like this, because it fits squarely with within the infrastructure package, in my opinion. Thank you, Mr. Gibbs, for your testimony.
Thank you, sir. I have been told by my folks that the $5.4 billion list has been provided to the committee staff, so you do have it.
Well, but also make sure that we get it, and our staff and the committee staff is great. I would ask them to provide it to us so that we can start pounding away at some of our colleagues to make sure all of it, or at least a chunk of it, is in this package as it wends its way through the House and the Senate.
Will do, sir. We took it for action.
And thank you, Mr. Perlmutter. We'll make sure that we get it out to every member of the committee. So thank you. And now let me recognize the gentleman from New Jersey, who is also an expert on space traffic and orbital debris, Mr. Norcross.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Appreciate it. Mr. Gibbs, great to have you here. When we read, and I've mentioned it quite often, NASA has been one of those organizations that we all look up to, that was always on the cutting edge. And, you know, it gave us real hope for the future, and you've done great things. I look at the assets, 14 states, 43 billion in assets, 5,000 buildings. It's a massive infrastructure. But what I hear today is rather distressing, and certainly focusing on the infrastructure needs. And you talk about limited resources. Have you ever had adequate resources to run the organization? Has there ever been a time in your career?
Not since I've been in the job, but I will tell you in 2012, the Mission Support Directorate comprised about 17% of the overall agency budget. Here in 2021, 2022, I'm around 12%. And this is coming at a time when the agency's budget, if you use it as a proxy for requirements, is going up. So I have an increasing requirements portfolio and a decreasing resources portfolio in which to supply mission support, which mission success is built on. It's a challenging proposition.
No, exactly where I'm headed towards that. You know, we hear about deferred maintenance, and you have a list, and there's certain degrees of lists that you have. You know, is it urgent? Does it have to be done? And when you think about the risk, is it a strategy when the likelihood of an asset's failure may have severe consequences? This is a decision that is made yearly basis on where your resources go, the money goes. Yeah. And that's what I want to talk about, is the culture of what is going on. One of the easiest things, and this is across business spectrums, whether you have a refinery or an office building, is deferred maintenance, not preventative maintenance. And that's where I want to really focus on how important that is, that each time you defer maintenance, you are making a choice to increase risk. We've seen example after example what has happened across this country when that risk is taken on. Sometimes you win, but sometimes you lose. And in your business, when you lose, people's lives are on the line. So let's talk about that. When you put together a budget, when is it that you say, we have to fix things or we can't do this? It seems that NASA is always, we'll get it done no matter what. And that's the risk I want to ask you about. How are you dealing with that? And at what point do you say no?
So I got to tell you, that is a great point, and it's one of those subtle points of culture. It's the other side of the coin of engagement, right? We have the best workforce in the federal government. We're the best place to work in the federal government. All those things are true because our folks are engaged and our leaders care about their people. The other side of that is we're going to get stuff done. We're going to work to nearly kill ourselves to get things done. And I think that sort of A student mentality sometimes can have unforeseen repercussions. And that is, well, they made do with X dollars. We can give them a little bit less and they'll make do with that too. So I think that has sometimes come into the thinking of a lot of folks. I will tell you though, when it comes to safety, you know, that is a line I will not cross. I will shut down a facility. I will shut down a system if I'm endangering personnel safety. If we get to that point, I won't hesitate, and then we'll figure out how to recover the programs and projects. But personnel safety is paramount, and I won't put anyone at risk with infrastructure.
No, and I appreciate if you know that risk, and that's the point we're making here, is without preventative maintenance, and that because the arc flash that our chairman brought up, you know, is stunning to me. There have been the energized gear risk has been in place for over a decade. This is nothing new. I saw the transformer that was on fire. That's nothing new. These are things that maintenance and preventive maintenance can figure out before it happens.
Right.
We have great advocates here, and I count myself as one of them, even though you have nothing in New Jersey. We care a lot about you because of what you do for our country. But this
That was me.
that culture has to change. You
Yes.
have to put that maintenance up there in certain degrees as a risk to life and limb. And if you don't know the risk, you don't know when it's going on. So, Mr. Chairman, and certainly to my colleague, Mr. Perlmutter, we are there to help you, but we can't always get it done and then live with consequences later on. With that, I yield back.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Norcross, thank you very much. And Mr. Gibbs, you may not realize this, but when Mr. Norcross, who is an accomplished electrician, talks to you about arc flashes, he knows what he's talking about. So
Yes, sir.
we're blessed to have people with a wide range of great skill sets. Representative Gonzalez has been with us for most of this hearing. Representative Gonzalez, if you're here, we'd love to recognize you for questions.
I think Representative Gonzalez is in the financial services hearing because I can see
Okay.
him on my TV.
Okay, in
But
the
I do-
meantime, our dear
I do
friend,
see
Mr.
Mr.
Weber
Weber.
from Texas has just arrived. Mr. Weber, if you're ready from your car to talk to Mr. Gibbs, we would love to recognize you.
Well, yeah, thank you. I'm ready. And actually, it's not my car. It belongs to the bank and me. You know how that goes.
Yes.
The buyer's laughing because he loves selling those cars. But anyway, thank you. Mr. Gibbs, I've read that over 83% of NASA's infrastructure is beyond its design life, with more than 70% of facilities as of 2017 being 50 years old. FY 22 Congressional Justification document explains that immediate repairs compile a growing share of the maintenance budget, with unscheduled maintenance costs up to 3 times more than scheduled. So my question is, how long has this problem been going, how long has it been continuing? And how do we ensure we don't end up with a similar situation or worse in 10 years?
That's a great question. I would tell you that our opportunity, if the opportunity is presented for additional resources where we can build new and retire the old, if we can put more dollars into our demolition account, if I can find ways to get rid of some of this deferred maintenance by demoing it and building new, that is one way for us to attack this problem. I think it's absolutely critical as we go forward that we continue to invest in those facilities and get rid and shrink our footprint so the portfolio is manageable in the future. It's getting to your future conversation. I don't think we're in a place where NASA has to own each and own of everything or 5,000 pieces of infrastructure. We need to work very closely with our mission directorates and develop a sustainable portfolio that supports our missions today and going forward. So there's a lot there. Hopefully I answered your question.
Well, thank you. And I appreciate that. And you talked about, smaller footprint, and I'm not able to see the clock there, Mr. Chairman. So I got another question. Mr. Gibbs, so with that in mind, do you believe the existing established structure within NASA for prioritizing infrastructure repairs and upgrades and the dispensing of funds is the best? Or are you able to extrapolate, if you're going to reduce your footprint, are you able to identify ways you can do that and then kind of categorize that those would be, if you will, at the back of the end of the line?
Yeah, the short answer there is yes. When we built the agency master planning process, the one we're using now at the agency level, we worked with industry heavily to see how did you do it? We went out and saw people that own scientific and laboratory and high science sort of portfolios and inventory of infrastructure and asked them for their advice. Say, how would you manage this? We then took that and overlaid it into a NASA process, which involved our mission directorates, who determine the current and future missions of the agency, and our centers to really understand what's the condition of the things that we're dealing with today. I think that process is going to lead us to a pretty good place. And like I said, we're well underway in that.
Yeah. Well, how much do I have any time left, Mr. Chairman?
Yeah, Mr. Weber, you still have 2 minutes left.
Oh, good, good, good. I should have started a timer. So, Mr. Gibbs, who lays out that plan? How do we coordinate that? And I know this is a tricky question, political question in some regard, with the changing of the guard every so often, every, say, 2 years in Congress or 4 years in the White House. How do we maintain that continuity?
I think through the publication of the agency master plan, which will be published in FY22. We've worked very hard on all of the things that we're working on. And one thing doesn't change. Well, the missions may change, and we have to be able to adapt to those missions changes as the administration's priorities change. The thing that doesn't change is a really in-depth knowledge and understanding of our infrastructure as it exists today. That's the backbone. That really tells us what our capabilities are and allows us to do measurement to what we need and what we don't need, depending on the mission. So I think we're in a pretty good place, sir.
And as the commercialization of space continues and NASA becomes a customer, if you will, are you able, is that going to necessitate, for lack of a better term, on an ongoing basis, changing that plan as we see working with companies, and as we see this new commercialization process gaining foothold or speed, or however you choose to look at it, or gaining warp speed maybe? So does
that's a great question. I would say, it's a really interesting, we talk about the commercialization of space. Even if we're buying services from private companies or from private industry, whether it be launch or anything else, they still generally end up relying on NASA backbone and infrastructure, like the state spaceport at Kennedy. So while the service may be cheaper on the front end, I'm going to have those commercial companies come to me and say, hey, we need greater electricity, ability to dispose of waste, launch services, greater pad availability, and all of these things. So from an infrastructure perspective, it all comes right back around, and we still have to continue to invest in our infrastructure to support commercial space.
Well, that's good to hear that there's a plan in place that'll ensure we can do that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Weber, very much. I believe, unless Mr. Gonzalez is abandoning his other committee hearing, that we have heard from all of our members with Mr. Gibbs today. So thank you, Mr. Gibbs, very much. Really appreciate your coming and testifying with a great knowledge of what NASA needs. And I can promise you we will all, Democrat and Republican, do our best to make sure that NASA has the dollars in the years to come to close that infrastructure gap.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the committee. Thank you for your time.
Yeah, thank you. So before we bring the hearing to a close, thank you. The record will remain open for 2 weeks for additional statements from members and for any additional questions the committee may ask of the witness. I'll make sure that we get the distribution of the full committee of the $5.4 billion, both urgent and looking forward infrastructure needs. And with that, Mr. Gibbs, you're excused to go back to your other job, and the hearing is now adjourned.
Thank you.